you're not kidding anybody. And the issue is that it's not just a legal issue, it's a tax issue as well. What kind of control do you have over this person? If you're saying how they do things, when they do things, where they do things, whatever, they're an employee, they're not an independent contractor.
Welcome to Investing for Generational Wealth. I'm John Lai from Clive Capital, where we help high earners just like you invest outside of the stock market to passively achieve long-term wealth generation through superior risk-adjusted returns, long-term passive income or cash flow, and tax benefits. Together with you, we're investing in over 1,000 multifamily apartments under renovations, nearly 100 single-family rental homes under development, more than 350,000 square foot of industrial real estate, over 700,000 of private loans, nearly 40 oil and gas wells, and we've expanded into other asset classes with the end goal of helping you, our investors, create diversified, balanced portfolios. Before we begin, a quick disclaimer as always, we're not financial advisors. All investments are subject to risks, including the possible loss of the money you invest. So please perform your due diligence before making any financial decisions. And of course, consult your CPA, your attorney before beginning investments. I'm your host, John Lai, and welcome to today's episode, Strategic Legal Planning and Small Business Challenges with Matt Furnaro. And Matt is a Florida-based business law attorney with over 2 decades of experience guiding entrepreneurs and families through every stage of their business journey. He's mentored more than a few new entrepreneurs, a trusted advocate for small and medium-sized businesses, and has been recognized by Forbes. And then today, in our discussion today, we'll talk about legal strategies every entrepreneur needs to know. We know a lot of you are W2 employees, but as you progress through and start your side business or start your full-time business, what those legal strategies are, how to avoid those common costly mistakes that small businesses and small business owners commonly make, how to structure your business for longevity and transferability. For those of us who don't know your journey, Matt, could you give our audience a brief history of where you got to or how you got to where you are today?
Sure, John. So thanks for having me. I guess regarding my legal career, I started out after I graduated law school. I worked for a boutique firm. Then I worked for 2 large AmLaw 200 law firms doing commercial litigation, representing big businesses, insurance companies, and banks. And about 11 years ago, I had the opportunity to go to one of the 10 largest law firms in the country, and I had 2 feet out the door ready to go. And then I kind of had a metaphysical kind of conversation with myself, spoke to my family, my wife, and decided I didn't really want to stay in big law doing that because I didn't want to wind up being like 75 years old and dying at my desk one day. And then people would be like, oh, he's a nice guy, whatever. So I decided, you know what, I want to go start my own law firm, but I want to focus on helping small businesses, entrepreneurs, and startups because I thought they're underserved by A, big law firms, and B, like local law firms who don't really focus on helping businesses. So that's what I decided to do, focus on helping them. And that's what I've been doing for the last 11 years.
That's great. Thank you for the background. And so for the past decade, 2 decades or so, you've been working with some small business owners. What's out of the gate, like what are some of the single most common mistakes that you see entrepreneurs make early in the early stages of their business, whether it's entity formation or contracts or something entirely different? And does it vary by industry?
Sure. Believe it or not, John, it does not vary by industry. It's pretty much the same
Oh,
mistake everyone
okay.
makes. Everyone's very excited, very eager to get into business, and they just go. And they don't really do the due diligence or the necessary planning or steps. They just go into business. And the issue is that they don't have a written business plan. They don't have professionals that they can call upon for their advice, and they don't really have a good reason behind why they choose a business organization type. They just go, and then they don't have the necessary governing documents or contracts that go with the business organization. They just go online, register, and start doing stuff. And that's like pretty much 4 or 5 steps that they just skip over. And I'm not, some people do all the steps and some people do some of the steps, but a lot of people just, like I said, they just go, they skip over those steps, and then either they're successful or they're unsuccessful. And they have issues because, like I said, they don't have written governing documents. They don't have a written business plan. They chose the wrong entity and they're going to get killed for taxes in a year or two.
Mhm.
They don't have contracts in place regarding employees. They don't have an employee handbook. They don't know what's an independent contractor versus an employee. They don't have terms of service on their website. They don't have terms of service on their apps. They don't have contracts that govern their relationships with other individuals or business entities. It all comes together, whether they're successful or not, because all those steps are going to come back and haunt them. So I would say, generally speaking, it's pretty much the same scenario for everyone. It's some variation of not doing that list of things that I just said that most entrepreneurs and startups and small businesses do or don't do in this case. And then I come in and I fix it or try to fix it the best I can retroactively. But ideally, I'd love to start out on the right foot. And a lot of people I work with do start out on the right foot. But if we had to pick what the biggest bugaboo or the biggest issue is, that's what it is.
Okay. As we talk about one of the steps, entity formation, help us walk through the key entity choices. I see the major ones being LLCs, S corps, possibly C corps if they get large enough. But when does one make sense over the other? What's misunderstood? What's a misunderstood entity for small business owner?
Sure. Like I had alluded to in the last segment that I was just talking about, I am part of your cadre of professionals who help you. And I always like to work with an accountant, a banker, and then whoever else you have that's industry specific. But I always, when a client comes to me before they pick out a business organization, I always defer to their accountant regarding which business organization to pick, because you can pick a business organization from a legal standpoint, from a couple different angles, but if it doesn't make sense from a tax standpoint, you're going to get killed on your taxes. So I always defer to the accountant. I can do it anyway, but if the accountant says that you need X, Y, or Z instead of whatever, then I'll defer to the accountant. But what I do is I go over holistically what the person wants, how many people are involved in the business, what kind of business it is, whatever. I go with the what the accountant says regarding their individual tax situation or their group tax situation among the people or whatever, and then we figure out which is the best organization to go with, whether it's a corporation, an S corporation, an LLC, a partnership, a limited partnership, a sole proprietorship, DBA, whatever it is. We figure it out. We'll put the documents together. We'll incorporate it in the state. We'll register it online, and we'll go from there.
Got it, got it. A kind of similar question, and I know this also is probably something that you would work out with the work in conjunction with the CPA. And this is a question about holding companies. Like, when does a holding company structure make sense versus a series LLC for investors managing multiple assets? And then, like, where are series LLCs available? And, what, first of all, what are they for our listeners and the pros and cons of them?
Sure. So I know obviously you guys deal a lot with real estate investment and real estate issue. Real estate investors love LLCs, love them. Most real estate investments are LLCs because of not just the legal benefit, but the tax benefit, which is it's really more the tax benefit, which is why a lot of real estate investments are held in LLCs. Properties are held as individual LLCs. They're titled as individual LLCs and whatever. It's not just for legal protection purposes, but it's like I said, it's for tax purposes, for pass-through taxation and not getting double taxed and things like that. The concept of the LLC is it's beneficial for something like a real estate holding company or whatever, where you form either a corporation that owns LLCs or an LLC that owns LLCs, or if you're for whatever reason an individual who owns LLCs. Generally speaking, you want the LLC to be where if you're investing in real property where the real property is, you don't want it to be a foreign LLC for the most part. Sometimes there's exceptions, but you want to register the LLC. Sometimes it's a single purpose LLC, like it only owns this house or owns this building or whatever. And then another LLC owns that LLC or owns a group of LLCs. The holding company, the LLC thing, that's part of your overall your overall strategy, depending on how big of an investor you are, how big of a group you have, or what it is you're doing. You start out with your base, which is either a corporation or an LLC, and then your tentacles go out where, depending on how you have everything structured, you want an individual LLC for a sole purpose of owning a building or a sole purpose of running a building or owning a series of buildings, and you just plan from there. So it's very not one size fits all. It's pretty subjective, although the system is objective in having a holding company and going from there. But you put it together as part of your overall plan of how your investment's going to work, what you want to invest in, how you want to do it. And then, of course, consult with the accountant to figure out from a money standpoint how you're going to deal with the income, how you're going to deal with the assets, how you're going to deal with the expenses and issues like that.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for that. I guess a related point is asset protection. How does asset protection work through a proper entity structure, and why does it matter for small businesses? There's also the notion of piercing the corporate veil, and if you could define what that means and how business owners might accidentally expose themselves to that concept. And then how do they, business owners, maintain that liability shield so that they protect themselves to the most that they can, utmost they can.
Sure. So the whole point, sure. So the whole point of having a business organization is that it's a fictional entity that creates a barrier between you and the business and liability and things like that. It doesn't matter what structure you pick or how, if you're not complying with business formalities and doing things correctly, you're going to be in trouble. So no matter where you are, no matter if you have a corporation, LLC, or whatever, you always have to maintain corporate formalities. You always make sure that you register your company and renew it every year. You always make sure that you have your annual meeting. You make sure you have a president, a vice president, a secretary, whatever. Make sure if you're an LLC, you have a managing member. Make sure you do all the compliance. Make sure you have a separate bank account. John has a separate bank account from John LLC. Make sure you don't cross over things. You don't take grandma's check that she sent you and put it in your LLC. You don't take your LLC credit card and take the kids out to McDonald's for dinner, that kind of thing. You make sure everything is rigidly, a wall is rigidly maintained between your personal finances and personal life and your business life. And that cuts down on potential personal liability and things because you're not your alter ego of your business. You're your own separate person. Your business is its own separate entity. They're run, professionally. They're run according to the law, and things that happen to the business for the business remain in the business. Things that happen to you personally remain personally. And if you do that for the most part, you're going to avoid a lot of the pitfalls that people fall into when they have personal liability problems, or when you talk about piercing the corporate veil, which means that you can have individual liability for things that happen to the business and vice versa, which if you comply with formalities, you have all the documents that we talked about earlier, you do all the things that I just said, you comply with your state laws regarding your corporation, your LLC, or whatever, you're going to avoid most of that. Sometimes some things can't be avoided if you personally guarantee things, if you also own things in your name as a joint asset or whatever. Those are the kind of things that are unavoidable where you're going to possibly have individual liability. But if you do the formalities and keep the rigid structure, you're going to avoid a lot of the potential pitfalls of having personal liabilities. And that's the whole reason why you have a business organization.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. I like that. Let's switch modes a little bit to contracts and business agreements. What are some of the most dangerous contract gaps that you've seen in small business agreements? And
Sure.
I guess,
So,
yeah, is it around payment terms, IP ownership, something else?
yeah, John, there can be a great short contract and a terrible long contract. Okay. You can have
Hmm.
a one-page contract that has all the terms you need and is great, and you can have a 50-page contract that's terrible. It's just, does it have the terms that are necessary for your situation? And does it govern the relationship between your business and the other business or the employee or the landlord or the leaseor or whatever it is that you're entering into a relationship with. And basically, even though objectively you always want terms like you want like a dispute provision in there, you want a venue provision, an attorney's fee provision, you want to make sure that it names specifically the business, not you, things like that. But subjectively, you want to make sure that it governs the relationship. It talks about who does what, when, where, why, and how. And it talks about if someone doesn't do that, what the remedies are and how you do it. And generally speaking, for any contract, if all of that stuff is in there, then the contract should be fine. And if it's not in there, then the contract, you're going to have problems. And like I said, you can have a great one-page contract, you can have a terrible 50-page contract. As much as you like boilerplate language and you like one size fits all, and as much as people throw out form contracts or whatever, they really should be tailored whenever possible to each situation because each situation is unique and you want to make sure that it applies to that situation. Though missing those provisions that I talked about, that's probably the biggest thing in contracts. And like I said, it's an overall conceptual thing, not saying who does answer all the questions and doesn't say what happens when someone doesn't do that. If those are missing, then that's not a good contract. If those are there, then that's generally speaking, you're going to have a good contract.
Got it. Okay. Let's talk about businesses that hire independent contractors. How do those entrepreneurs protect themselves, both legally and from the IRS classification perspective? How do they protect themselves from anything that the independent contractors might do? And what's the difference between a 1099 contractor, maybe, and a misclassified employee?
Yeah, that's the trick now, John, isn't it? The everyone wants a 1099 independent contract. Nobody wants a W-2 employee. The
Right.
problem is that a lot of people try to dummy it up and give titles to people and do whatever, and they're really full-time employees. You're not kidding anybody. And the issue is that it's not just a legal issue, it's a tax issue as well. What kind of control do you have over this person? If you're saying how they do things, when they do things, where they do things, whatever, they're an employee, they're not an independent contractor. So, one of the things you want to make sure is that they truly are an independent contractor and that complies with your state law as to what an independent contractor is, that complies with what the IRS version of an independent contractor is. You want there to be an independent contractor agreement. If they're a W-2 employee, you want there to be an employment agreement. You want there to be an employee handbook that covers what employees do versus what independent contractors do. They can't be interchangeable because if they are, they're employees. So you want to make sure all that stuff is distinguishable. You want to make sure that if you have an independent contractor, even though you're in charge of them, they do whatever, that there's some degree of autonomy and non-exclusivity with you versus not, because then they're an employee. So it's a dance, it's a nuanced dance. Everyone tries to get away with calling everyone independent contractors. And it's just, you got to make sure that you do things correctly. You make sure that you specifically define what their roles are and that they have some degree of, I don't want to say freedom, but they're not under your full control like a full-time employee would be. And it's a very delicate balancing act where a lot of people get in a lot of trouble over this. And this, a lot of employment attorneys, their whole careers are based on this. If you have someone who's actually an employee, don't mess around. They're an employee, fess up to it, do what's right, withhold the taxes, have the employment agreement, whatever, because sooner or later, if you're messing around, whether it's the IRS, whether it's a state or local regulatory entity, whether you get named in a lawsuit, whether you don't pay someone wages or salary, it's going to come out. So if they're truly an independent contractor, they're an independent contractor. But if they're an employee, you don't call them independent contractor, call them an employee. It's part of the cost of doing business and move on. And generally speaking, that's how it is. That's why when I have issues where I get people trying to very delicately cross the line or whatever, I'll bring in an employment law specialist who focuses solely on employment law, and we'll discuss the issue with them because they can bring a little extra or bring a lot extra knowledge and talk about very nuanced, specific things. But like I said, if you can't hide the fact that someone's an employee if they're really an employee, and that's
Right.
essentially what the distinction between an independent contractor, a 1099, and a W-2 employee is that if they're really an employee, they're an employee. You're not going to fool anyone ultimately, and you're going to literally pay the price later on.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's talk about another thorny issue in some states, and that's non-disclosure agreements. So when should a business owner use an NDA versus maybe a non-compete, or are non-competes even enforceable anymore? And then I guess what is the recent FTC activity? How has that changed the landscape?
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit, they're related, but it's actually two different issues, the non-disclosure aspect and the non-compete aspect. I'll discuss the non-disclosure aspect first. That's generally speaking, that's not really affected by what's recent legislation you've heard or whatever, because that's information. Okay. So if you have protectable information, proprietary information, things like that, those can still be subject to non-disclosure agreements. And again, this is all state specific. So, your state may vary. I'm speaking generally from a Florida perspective, but if you have real proprietary information, then you have a right to protect that. And you can seek to enforce your non-disclosure agreement. And what does real proprietary information mean? Okay. I have the formula to Coca-Cola. Okay. I know the Colonel's secret spices and flavors. Okay. I invented the architecture that nobody knows how it works for Google or Chat GPT or something like that. Okay.
Right.
Inf True proprietary information is not something like, oh, I have your customer list, but I can figure out your customer list based on public filings or things like that. Sometimes customer lists, yeah, can be proprietary or whatever. Depending on the jurisdiction you're in, yeah, you can seek to enforce non-disclosure, but it better be like proprietary or information that needs to be kept confidential. It just can't be general knowledge. Okay. I can't have you come work for me at my hamburger joint and then have a non-disclosure agreement saying, "Oh, John has an incredible way to make hamburgers and he can't work at any other hamburger place," and disclose that knowledge to anyone. No. Okay. That's not how non-disclosure agreements work. That's not proprietary or secret information or anything like that. Okay. Regarding the non-compete aspect, okay, that's what's been dealt with the FTC recently. It's died down a little bit, but that's again totally state specific, even though the federal government's trying to step in. And traditionally speaking, we don't like to restrain trade in the United States. We're all about the free market, the free economy, and whatever. We don't want to prevent people from working. So you've seen over the years the non-compete get whittled down depending on which states you're in. Some states are, I don't want to say essentially useless, but they're very hard to enforce. Other states, they're easier to enforce. So overall, though, the trend has been that they're taking away their impact over time. And as you see, the federal government wants to get rid of them altogether. Again, similar to the non-disclosure issue, the non-compete is there's certain industries where it doesn't even apply. Like, for instance, the law, you can't have a non-compete for an attorney. An attorney can't not be an attorney somewhere or things like that. But then there's other industries where they can be because you may have unique or proprietary skills or information that someone I can't leave Apple and go next door to IBM or whatever cool tech version there is of that parable these days. I don't even know.
Hmm.
But that kind of thing, yeah, that's probably protectable, but it's all depends on the state you're in. It depends on the term. If it's a lifetime, that's automatically out the window. That's never going to work. If it's a finite period of time, depending on where you are, some people find 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 year reasonable. And then geography, all of Earth, that's going out the window. All of the United States, that's going out the window. State specific, maybe depending on where you are. So it's trending away from restraining trade, restraining things because people don't really, we want free trade, we want free things. We don't want to restrain people. And that's kind of going out the window as far as enforcement and compliance these days.
That makes sense. A similar type of topic is intellectual property and maybe even brand protection. So many of our listeners, as they start building up their their businesses, they're building personal brands, consulting practices, or content businesses. When should they think about protecting their IP? I think a lot of us know about the differences between trademarks, copyrights, and patents, but maybe a little bit of clarification there. And what does each protect?
Sure. So you want to protect your IP as soon as possible. I
Mm,
understand there's a cost associated with it, but you're in business, so there's a cost associated with everything. And if you want to protect your intellectual property, you need to protect it and enforce it just like you would your real or personal property. There's no difference. If I had my stack of $100 bills, I wouldn't just leave it out for anyone to come take it. Same thing with your mark or your distinctive business name or your website or whatever. You're not going to leave it out so anyone can take it. And when you make an absurd reference like that, it brings it home because you're right. I wouldn't leave my $100 bill collection out. Same thing. I wouldn't do whatever. You want to do that from the inception. And again, there's multiple different kinds of intellectual property. So there's the trademark, which is a descriptive mark, service mark, a logo, something like that, where you can register it at the state level, which really isn't advisable. You want to register it at the federal level, and you're able to enforce it. You can renew it and essentially enforce it for a really long time. Patent is like when you invent something, an invention, a proprietary system, or something like that. You can patent it. That's only federal. You have 20-year rights to it. Copyright is when you have a idea that's put into a tangible medium, similar to trademarks, but a little different. You automatically have a common law copyright the moment something's created, but you also want to register it. It's also federal registration. So, and then there's trade secrets, which are, um, again, state-based, common law-based, which are things that you don't want people to know about, but you're not like going to register it as a patent or a trademark or anything. It's just something you want to keep secret, like the Coca-Cola formula or whatever.
mm.
So these are all things that if you're in business, like I said, you wouldn't leave your personal property out there, so you shouldn't leave your intellectual property out there, and you want to protect it from the moment you start. So later on down the road, you don't have to change names, you don't have to change systems, you don't have to do whatever, you don't have to worry about getting sued by someone or something like that.
Um, I guess similarly, how do you protect a business name or a brand that operates across states and or maybe even online? And what happens if someone already has your business name in another state or perhaps in another country?
So it depends on if it's, and you're going to get into a whole trademark analysis now, if it's generic, if it's descriptive, if it's novel and new or whatever, if it's already a registered trademark, if someone's in another state and using it in your state. So these are things where if you're starting something and you want a proprietary name or something, you want to do you want to do a search, not just a Google search or whatever, but you want to do a trademark search if you're going to
Right.
ultimately trademark it to see if someone else is using it. And if they are, you're going to really want to think about if you're going to want to use that name or come up with another name or a different name that's new and innovative or different that no one has, because someone can come down the road and be like, you know what, I've been using that name, even though you're in Oregon, I'm in Florida. You're using it in Oregon, but you have a website where I can buy stuff in Florida. So you've been using it in Florida. And I just started it in Florida. And now people don't know the difference between me or John's business. So they're confused. So you can
Right.
come sue me in Florida if you want, or you can sue me in Oregon if you want. You want to make sure that your name's not being used. And if it is, you have the rights to use it, and it is a name that is usable.
What if you do find something, some other entity, business entity that's in another state that is using your name, maybe not in the same industry or context, but, and then what if they are in the same industry? What can you do to protect yourself? Or maybe it's too late at that point.
It may be too late at that point, particularly if
Yeah,
you're in the same industry, because like I said, the lines are blurred these days where if you have a website or if you have an app or if you're on social media, you're everywhere at all times.
right.
So it's not I'm in my little castle here in a different state and I never go into your state or doing and I can't be seen in another state or whatever. You're always visible at all times. So if someone else has the other name, if they have the rights to it, you're going to possibly have problems down the road. And you're really going to want to think about if you want to come up with another name that someone else doesn't have,
Yep.
or reach out to that business and make nice with them and see if you can make an agreement, like a licensing agreement or a coexistence agreement or something saying that I can use my name if I'm only in Florida, not online. You can use your name in Oregon and online or only in Oregon or whatever, and I'll pay you money or I won't compete with it or that kind of thing. So that's how
Yeah.
you address that issue.
What if they're in a different industry and more or less unrelated?
Same thing though. I
Okay.
mean, it can cross over, because it can just, you just want to make sure you do the same due diligence, even if it's a different industry.
Got it.
If you know someone's out there using the name and it's in a different industry, you still may want to reach out to them and see, like I said, if you can make nice with them and coexist because they may want to get into your industry in the future
Right.
and you don't know that.
Yeah.
And they predate you by 10 years. So even though you came along and you've been in your industry longer, they've been in business longer. So then you're going to have a issue on your hands.
Yeah.
Whether that's right or wrong, you're still going to have the issue that you're going to have to deal with.
What are, and we've talked through some of these already, what are some of the biggest legal and regulatory challenges facing small businesses in 2026 and maybe into the future? From a regulatory perspective, that maybe less friendly to small businesses that you know of.
It's the same usual stuff that's always affecting business, making sure you do your compliance with your local, state, county, municipal laws
Yeah.
regarding is your business correctly registered? Are you paying your taxes? Are you keeping your corporate formalities? Are you registered correctly? Are you paying your federal taxes? Are your employees all up to snuff? Do you have the right licenses? Do you have the right insurance? Do you have the right banking? All that kind of stuff. The general issues that have affected businesses in some form for all of time still apply today. It's just they're more acute and they're more out there because of the proliferation of technology. So it's the same issues that have always faced issues, and now there's more issues because of technology. So now you got to make sure that your website is ADA compliant and crazy things that you would have never had to think of in
Right.
years past where now that's an issue. Is your website ADA compliant? If not, you're in violation. So those are in your app. Is your app ADA compliant? So those are the kind of issues where unthinkable, inconceivable years ago where now they're there. But it's all the same complying with formalities, doing things the right way, complying with laws, paying things correctly, classifying things correctly, doing things formally. It's the same formula, just with a few variables for updated for 2026.
I one there are a couple of these things that I think might be more relevant in more recent years. Remote teams, remote businesses have been pretty big in the last, call it 5, 6, maybe even 10 years, and digital businesses as well. And in my mind, that opens businesses and entrepreneurs up to maybe potentially more legal risks that maybe didn't exist 10 years ago. I'm thinking even if I operate in Oregon, if I hire someone remotely, whether it's in the US or in another country, does that open up either taxes or legal compliance issues across different states? And I guess where does Nexus come into play?
Sure, for the most part, the answer is it could, depending on how you have these people operating remotely. So again, it goes back to what we were just talking about, W-2 versus 1099. And does John LLC or John Co. employ these people, or do you have a third party that you go through and I'm using employ, I don't know if I'm assuming they're independent contractors or whatever, but is it a third party that you pay the third party and the third party hires them and does whatever, or is it you directly and things like that? So it's all, again, the classic attorney answer, it depends. So it depends on how you're doing it, because if it's you directly, you're really opening yourself up to exposure, liability, risk, versus if you're using like a third party, like staffing agency for like offshore personnel or that kind of thing. Or same thing with data compliance and information safety and things like that. Is your system open where I can access it from remotely versus it's a closed system
Right.
So what kind of security do you have on your data? Can I get customer information if I hack in there, or is there a hole in your system for whatever? So these are all the kind of things. And then depending on which industry, and if you're in the medical industry, then you have HIPAA issues. If you're in the money, if you're doing money or whatever, then there's banking regulatory issues. If you're in debt collection, there's FDCPA issues and all, telephone Consumer Protection Act, all kinds of issues open up once you start doing that. So that's why you want to make sure that you just don't run and do stuff. You make sure you consult with an attorney, make sure you consult with whatever to make sure that your next step is in line with what you're doing as far as risk, liability, and is that risk and liability covered by how I'm doing it with a third party? Do I have to increase my business insurance? Do I have to have like E&O insurance? That kind of thing. So
Yeah.
that's why, like I said, when we opened up, I have a group of professionals I work with. That's why, for instance, you want a commercial insurance broker on your side because you want to make sure you have a commercial policy in place for your business that covers all that stuff regardless and make sure like we're talking about individual liability, you want to make sure that commercial policy is in place to protect you also individually.
Yeah, yeah, and there was the next question I was going to ask was about, for example, cybersecurity liability, data privacy. For those, maybe not necessarily have to worry about HIPAA or anything like that, but if you handle customer information, what's the minimum protection? Sounds like insurance is one avenue small businesses can take to limit legal exposure or at least cover themselves. And maybe you can expound on what are some other things that they could be doing.
Yeah, you want to make sure, like you have, just like you should have if you have employees or independent contractors, you have an employment handbook, you have a data slash IT slash whatever you want to call it, handbook slash policy in place where it's here's how we keep data confidential. Here's our systems in place. Here's what we do. And then not just say you do it, you actually do it. Make sure you have
Right.
like multi-factor authentication for everything. Make sure that only certain people can get access to data in your company and things like that. And that's why you want to work with, I would say, traditionally an IT professional, but it's much more than that now regarding like data security, data, things like that. Make sure you have that in place too, to make sure that you have all that information and all that stuff secure.
Yep, that makes sense.
And then
Um,
make sure you actually do it too, which
yeah,
is the main part.
right.
If I have my password written down here on this piece of paper that I leave out for the Uber delivery guy to come take a look at, my system's no good. But if it's multi-factor authentication with nobody gets in or out without two-factor security or whatever, then you should be okay.
Yep. We hear a lot about BOI reporting, beneficial ownership information. What do small business owners need to know about that?
Yeah, make sure every year you report who actually owns the company.
Okay,
It's pretty simple. It's
right.
not as flippant as that may sound. It's not that hard. You do it once a year. You tell the feds that blank owns blank. That's it. You're done. No more thought. You don't have to put a lot of thought into it.
Got it. Okay.
And if you're hiding ownership, then you're probably going to have a lot more problems than disclosing who owns something.
Could you talk a little bit about that last point?
Yeah, with beneficial ownership, ending of secret Swiss bank accounts, all the openness and all the disclosures and stuff that have gone on. You're just like how we talked about hiding the fact that someone's really a full-time employee back home in 1099. You're the days of being able to just hide behind a Cook Islands Nevis Trust owning a Gibraltar company and all that stuff is going out the window. So just disclose who owns what and deal with it. And if you can't do that, you need to rethink about what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Okay. Let's transition to business succession and generational wealth planning. Our podcast is called Investing for Generational Wealth. How do business owners plan for business succession, and how's that maybe connected to long-term wealth building? And maybe what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see business owners make when it comes to exit planning?
Sure. So this kind of goes a little bit into the realm of like individual estate and trust planning, which this should be part of too, and part of that overall plan. That's why when I deal with that with my clients, I make sure that I work with their estates and trust attorney, or we get an estates and trust attorney involved so that
Hmm.
we can deal with if something happens, what happens to everything, not just the piece or whatever, or we forget the corporate part or we forget your business interests or whatever. So you want to make sure that in your governing documents that we've been talking about, you make sure that it says in there what happens if you want to buy, sell, die, become incapacitated, etc. It's got to be in those documents when you start out. And you want to make sure that it's also part of your estate planning as well, that it says if I kick off, go look at my operating agreement. And it's going to tell you that my the guy who owns the 50% of my LLC gets first shot at my LLC interest. And then if not, then my family gets it or vice versa. So you want to make sure that's part of your plan from the outset of your business. I know that's forward thinking and that's kind of far along, whatever, but that's the kind of thing where you're going to avoid a lot of problems later on if you think of that at the beginning and you have it in your governing documents. What happens is, like I said, you want to buy, you want to sell, you want to kick someone out, you become incapacitated, you die. All that stuff has to be accounted for and taken into account when you start your business to do it properly. You can do it afterwards if you want, but it's all going to be retrospective damage control slash reactive stuff versus proactively doing it to begin with and making sure you have full control over it.
Thank you for that. Let's switch gears. And we've been talking about starting up a business, entrepreneurship, and the legal ramifications of that. If I'm thinking about our audience, they are primarily investors. So, as an investor, how should I look at alternative investments like real estate syndications, private equity, oil and gas, and the like? The legal red flags that I should be watching out for in offering documents, what clauses in PPMs, private placement memorandums, do you read first? Where should what approach should I take as an investor?
As an attorney, my first thing I would tell you is have an attorney review it all. All right. If you're handing out a lot of money and you're getting involved in things where you're going to own things, you're going to be liable, or your business organization is going to be liable for things or whatever, you're not going to cheap out. You're going to have an attorney review the document, not just from a legal standpoint or whatever, from a conceptual standpoint. And you also want to probably bring in your financial people as well, whoever that may be, banker, financial investor, whatever it is you're working with, your accountant, et cetera, to look at this overall thing of how is this going to impact you business wise and individually. And obviously, you want all of these eyes on your documents to make sure that from every compliance and regulatory standpoint that they're on point. And then you're left to just make the business decision of, am I going to put money into this? And what are my benefits and what are my risks are? So there's no one red flag in the placement memo or an IPO or something you want to be looking out for. It's just conceptually, you want your team, hopefully your team, or at a minimum you, but hopefully your team, to look at it with a discerning eye to make sure that it makes sense from all different aspects and that it's all there and that there's nothing fishy, there's nothing weird going on. The Nigerian prince isn't asking for your money or whatever crazy things
Right.
going on or the secret that nobody knows about. Like all obviously those are all red flags, but and is again, it's subjective because each deal is unique, and you want to bring that approach to each deal where you have a very discerning eye and you take your time. If someone's trying to rush you into do something, it's not the deal for you.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple of things that I wanted to circle back on. One might be if you see a lot of layers in the organizational structure, is that a red flag? And then having some type of offshore entity, is that a red flag?
It could be a red flag. For the most part, unless you're into some really advanced stuff and you got a real lot of money and a really lot of things, you don't really need that many levels of layers and you don't need offshore stuff. It's just it's the costs don't outweigh the benefits in doing things that way,
Right.
particularly in this day and age. And would I say that's a red flag? I would probably say, yeah, that would be a red flag, not because it's illegitimate or whatever, but because it's a pain in the ass. And as an investor, if you ever want to get your money back or you want liability or accountability for things, if you got to go through 10 layers and you got to go to a like a Cook Islands trust or something crazy, then that's not the deal for you
Yeah.
versus an LLC in Delaware or something like that, much easier to do whatever with. So I wouldn't say necessarily red flag. I would say necessarily red flag something especially going on, but just from a it's not going to be convenient standpoint, yes, that would be a red flag.
Let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, AI, and how that's affecting legal. A lot of individuals, a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs are leveraging AI, LLMs as the first line of not necessarily defense, but first line of their legal business question answering. And what's your perspective on that? I think ultimately you should have some type of legal counsel to back you up. But what do you think about people going to their LLMs as the first line of defense for answering legal questions?
I'm a huge proponent of AI. I love AI. I use AI in my practice of law. I use AI in my business, but I ethically use AI. I effectively use AI, and I make sure I fact and legal check everything the AI does. And it works great when you do it correctly.
Mm.
And if you do it incorrectly, it's catastrophic. For the average business owner, the average entrepreneur, the average investor, whatever, if they don't know what they're looking for, it's just the same thing for the last 30 years. If you did a Yahoo search or a Google search or whatever, you're going to find information. You don't know if it's right or you don't know if it's wrong. It's the same thing with AI. You don't know if it's right. You don't know if it's wrong. And it's going to cost you to find out. It's either going to cost you preemptively to find out and do it right, or it's going to retroactively cost you a lot to fix it later on. Obviously, you're going to use AI no matter what I say or do as a client or as an investor. So just take it with a grain of salt. It could give you the right answer. It could give you the wrong answer. I'm a professional. I think I know for the most part regarding the law what's right and what's wrong, at least in what I do. And the AI doesn't necessarily know that. So that's why you always want to have a human in the equation to do the final fact checking, whether it's from the law, the accounting, the regulatory, whatever it is. It's a great source to get started to do whatever, but you're not going to go around doing AI stuff. And if you apply that paradigm to other professions, it's absurd. I don't feel good today. Let me go on ChatGPT and diagnose myself and find out what's wrong.
And
Oh,
a
I
lot
think
of
I have
people
a
do
brain
that,
tumor.
unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, I have a brain tumor. All right, let me
Right,
go
right,
on
right,
ChatGPT and figure out how to remove it because I can do it
right.
myself. The AI will tell me how to do it.
Right.
And if you apply that to that, it's well, again another absurd whatever. But if you apply it to the
Yeah,
law, people are like, oh yeah, I can write a contract and do whatever, or I can figure out a legal argument. Yeah, but it may or may not be right. So good informational tool helps you do things, helps facilitate things. Again, must put controls on it, must be in charge of it, must consult a professional to make sure it's right or wrong.
great, great answer. Thank you for that. We're getting to the top of the hour, and we have a few questions that we always close with our guests. One is describe a failure you've had in early past, and what have you learned from that failure as a teaching moment for others?
Sure. So starting my own business, knew nothing about business, had to learn all of it on my own, which I've done and through a couple programs, which were great. Made a lot of mistakes spending money on crap, as blunt as that is,
Mm.
and learned a lot from it, particularly advertising, SEO, web stuff, whatever. So big mistakes I made, spent a lot of money, wasted a lot of money, learned a lot of lessons, am much more efficient and effective now regarding advertising, SEO, and things like that, and life lesson, business lesson learned.
Yeah. A similar type of question is go back to a 10, 20-year version of yourself, younger version of yourself. What advice would you give yourself knowing what you know now?
John, it's the old, if I do that, I may wake up and have no arm or something, or the butterfly effect or something crazy. So I would just tell myself to, I wouldn't say anything substantive other than believe in yourself, do your due diligence, and stand by what you do, and you'll be fine. I wouldn't say, oh, make a right turn here and do that. I wouldn't do anything like that. I would just be like, You'll be fine. Just believe in yourself. Make sure you do everything correct and use your due diligence and don't cut corners and things like that.
It's great.
I
Great
wouldn't be
advice.
like, play the lottery on this day or bet on the Giants in the Super Bowl. I wouldn't do that. So.
How do you give back to your community?
Sure. So one of the things I do is like I just talked about how I learned about business. I learned about business through two programs, the Kauffman Foundation and the
Hmm,
Jim Moran Institute. And they were both free programs. And for the last almost decade, I've been a volunteer instructor for those two programs.
that's
And
great.
I do the business law component and help out a lot of entrepreneurs and startups that way.
That's great. And thank you for doing that. For those interested in learning more about you and your services, what's the best way to reach you? Do you have a website, a book, a resource that you'd like to share with the audience?
Sure. So just go to my website, fornarolegal.com, just my last name, Fornaro legal.com. It's got all my information, all my contact information, all my good stuff in there, all my blogs, all my videos, all my frequently asked questions. It's all there. And if you have any questions or need any help, just email me or call me.
Great. Thank you very much for the great conversation, Matt. This has been incredibly helpful for our audience, eye-opening for me. We will include Matt's contact information in the description to this particular podcast episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you're listening to for us to continue bringing you the best educational content. Thanks, everyone. Until next time, keep learning to invest for generational wealth.